welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In continuation with the series on sociological research method, in today's lecture we are going to discuss on ethics in research. Now when we as researchers are studying human behavior, it is very important that we as researcher keep our ethical responsibility. Today we are going to discuss John Levy Martin's book Thinking Through Methods, a Social Science Primer. Here we need to read chapter 6, which is on ethic in social research, and it is a well written book which is talking about how it is important for researchers to maintain ethic, giving example from previous work where there was a kind of a disimbalance and the researcher failed to maintain ethical responsibility. So, John Levy Martin's Thinking Through Method, a Social Science Primer, published in 2017, is a distinctive and highly regarded book that aims to guide social science researchers, particularly in qualitative research, to think through and with methods rather than simply follow mechanical rules. So, when we are doing quantitative research, we know we are working with numbers, data. So, it is very kind of comparatively easier to interpret this data, but in qualitative research, when we are participating among the respondent or we are observing the behavior, talking about the opinion, writing narratives, we have to be very cautious about the way in which we do not in any way harm the informants or the respondent, and that is why ethic in research is very important in qualitative research. As I already said, chapter 6 of this book, Ethic in Research, is a crucial part of this primer as addresses someone of the most vital aspect of responsible social science. Martin encourages researchers to cultivate a deep ethical sensibility that is integrated into every stage of the research process. And that is why he begins with a section titled Decide Beforehand. Before we enter into the field, in the field and after we leave the field, ethic is continuously to be present. So, an ethical dilemma that can arise in participant observation, particularly when researchers find themselves in situation where the group may engage in activities they deem morally or legally questionable. The challenge of balancing immersion in a community while maintaining a personal and ethical boundary is a significant concern of many researchers. Planning ahead for these scenarios is a prudent approach. And here he mentions a few strategies that can help researchers navigate these complexities. How you plan your research in order to kind of maintain that ethical balance. First is, before entering the field, researchers should consider the outline and outline the ethical boundaries. This includes identifying specific actions or behavior they will not engage or condone. So, you have to be kind of well aware in advance what are the line which you are not going to cross, what are the certain kind of activity which you will not enter or you are not going to kind of take a stand in terms of condoning a behavior or giving you in your own opinion about it. The second is pre-research reflection. Engaging in reflective practice prior to fieldwork can help researchers clarify their values and ethical stances. This could involve writing down potential scenarios and deciding in advance how they would respond. Now, a researcher is well aware of the objective of the research. So, before you actually go into the community and start doing your research, you should kind of think or reflect on your research and roughly create map out the conflicting situations or certain questions that could make the respondent uncomfortable, and in advance think about how you would respond to it, or how you could make that unwanting unpleasant situation comfortable. Third, open communication with participant. As you mentioned with Janowski approach, being transparent with participant about your role and limitation can help set expectations. By communicating your boundaries upfront, researchers can foster trust while making it clear that certain behavior will not be accepted. Fourth, contingency plan. Researchers should be prepared to take action if they witness illegal or harmful activities. This might include knowing when to disengage, reporting to authorities, or taking steps to protect vulnerable individuals. Fifth, ethical oversight. Consulting with an ethical review board or a mentor can provide valuable insight and guidance on navigating these dilemmas. They can help identify potential risk and ethical considerations that might not be immediately apparent. So, it's very important to kind of either do a review of literature on certain areas which are difficult to intrude, or where there is a lot of research data required on private opinion, on personal behavior, and kind of be more familiar with your field in terms of certain behaviors which you yourself cannot predict or you are kind of not aware of. The fifth is reflexivity. Continuously reflecting on one's role as a researcher and the impact of their presence can help maintain ethical integrity. This involves being aware of how one's action and decision influence the group dynamic and the research content. Sixth, maintain perspective. Researchers should remember they are not extraordinary figures like James Bond or Che Guevara. You are not entering as a field as an expert, or you're not entering that field as someone who could bring about drastic transformation. Rather, as a researcher, your entry in the field is for your own knowledge, is in for your own data, and therefore you cannot create a hierarchy between yourself and the respondent. So, it is important to acknowledge that the work that the respondents are doing is more important, because you are studying that work. You have to kind of understand why they are doing it, the way in which they are doing it. So, it is kind of not passing any negative judgment or kind of not doing your work at the expense of others' well being. So, ethical consistency is very example, and therefore what becomes important is to understand what are the rules of the thumb. How do you kind of maintain certain protocol for doing ethical research. So, the ethical consistency, if an action is not acceptable in everyday life, it should not be deemed acceptable in research. Abstract values often lead to poor ethical decision. Instead, concern for individual and fundamental principles should guide the behavior. Researchers should avoid justification for unethical behavior. They should not kind of be giving any kind of valid reason for doing unethical research. They should be wary of convincing themselves that unethical actions are justified by the potential benefits of their research. Whether you give the justification that you kind of doing a scientific study, or you are kind of doing that social work for the community, are kind of all for your own benefit, and so that you get a good data and you're able to write a good report. So, that should be avoided. Fear is a natural response and should not lead to rationalizing human behavior. Ethical responsibility implies that while researchers may feel a heightened obligation due to their role, they must ensure they do not create a special morality that allows them to break basic ethical rules. Visibility of ethical issues. Many ethical issues become apparent during the writing phase of research, even if they were not obvious during the study itself. This emphasizes the need for ongoing reflection on ethical practices throughout the research process. So, it's not only when we are kind of doing field work, it is prior to entry the field, even when we are writing a research proposal, doing the research, the data collection, analysis of data, and then most important, while writing the report. This emphasis emphasizing the importance to kind of maintain continuity. The focus should be on grounded approach to ethics in research, emphasizing the importance of empathy, integrity, and consistency in decision making. A lot of our ethical problems arises when we are writing it up. The simplest ethical problem for sociologists writing up their finding pertains to the disclosure as opposed to non-disclosure of information. So, we kind of are under the temptation of revealing the identity of the respondent, so that we want to kind of make our research more recognized, or kind of add weightage to that research. We want to disclose the identity. Now, there is a crucial distinction between confidentiality, that is, keeping information secret, and anonymity, ensuring subjects are not identifiable. Researchers often mistakenly conflate the two, leading to ethical dilemma. Sociologists should be cautious when promising confidentiality, especially since they often plan to publish their findings. Blanket promises of confidentiality are misleading, as it is difficult to maintain complete secrecy about information that is intended for publication. So, when we are in the field collecting data, we make a lot of promises that your identity will not be disclosed, we will maintain confidentiality, but by many means this cannot remain a secret, and therefore it becomes a more of a dilemma. Unlike certain professionals like lawyers, psychologists, who have evidentiary privilege, sociologists do not have a legal right to keep information confidential from law enforcement. This means that researcher could face legal consequences such as contempt of court if they refuse to disclose their notes or finding when summoned. So, it is important that kind of understand the complexity of confidentiality and anonymity, especially in social science researches. Now, the author also refers to the bureaucratic structures like institutional review boards, which sets up guidelines or certain research norms for conducting social science researches. So, some forms of evidentiary privilege may exist for specific studies like those involving drug addictions. These protections are limited in scope and do not cover all potential legal issues. However, the introduction of institutional review boards has led to the improved ethical practices, even if researchers often find them cumbersome or irrelevant. You have to abide by the guideline of the IRBs for your research to be accepted. So, whether you want or you do not, your ethics in research would be maintained. So, what are the guidelines suggesting? Number one is confidentiality. When sociologists promise confidentiality without fully understanding the implications, they may take notes that inadvertently include identifiable information and then fail to adequately protect this information in the draft and discussion. Researchers often employ weak anonymization techniques such as retaining initials or using pseudonym that are too obvious, making it easy for reader to identify participants. Simple search and replace methods at the end of writing process do not effectively safeguard anonymity. Participants are often aware of the potential risk to their confidentiality. For instance, Gary Allen Fine's experience with restaurant workers illustrate that even when researchers assure confidentiality, the workers may still worry about being identified, especially in small or specific contexts. The confidential information is kind of only concerned about the key informant. Now, where the research is being conducted, other key stakeholders, through several other ways, the key informant's identity is disclosed, and that kind of raises questions on whether the author's promise of confidentiality has been retained. So, the attempt to disguise locations or information by changing names or details often fail. For example, Bosk's study of teaching hospital, referred to as Pacific Hospital, was easily recognizable to those familiar with the area, undermining any claims of confidentiality. Researcher must consider whether anonymity is genuinely in the best interest of their subjects. Now, this also becomes complicated whether you are anonymous and you are studying a very complex social phenomena which requires attention, but because of your promise of confidentiality you retain anonymity. Now that problem cannot kind of be addressed because it is anonymous and it is kind of being not being disclosed. So there is a kind of a dilemma here. Some individuals may prefer to be cited by name to maintain control over the statements or reputations. As Missel Dunier points out, researchers might refuse to disclose names to protect themselves rather than their subject. So, confidentiality and anonymity is kind of a complicated issue. It is essential for researchers to reflect on their motivations for maintaining anonymity and to differentiate between their own interest and those of the participants. Confidentiality and anonymity in sociological research calls for researchers to critically evaluate their method and the ethical implications of their decision. The next section in this chapter talks about disclosure and discretion. These are two critical concepts in research ethics, particularly qualitative methodologies like ethnography, where researchers often engage deeply and personally with their subject. Disclosure refers to the act of revealing information to research participants and other stakeholders about the nature of the research. It's closely tied to the principle of informed consent. The Carolyn Elias case is used by the author to highlight how disclosure and discretion can lead to unethical practices. Here, the author is making reference to Carolyn Elias' study, where it is kind of being discussed that she failed to maintain the ethics in research. She said she was writing a paper on fishing, but never explicitly stated that she was studying you. That is, when she met her informant or her respondent, it was kind of indirectly making reference to she was just writing a paper, just trying to understand the occupation, never kind of disclosed to the informant that she was doing an ethnographic study where she was doing the everyday life lived by the community. Her use of unethical methods, spying, lack of transparency led her to incorrect or incomplete conclusion about the community. So when you do not disclose your objective or the real reason why you are doing your research, the key informant may also kind of not be very open or not discuss everything, and therefore the research is then a misrepresentation of the reality. It is a case of ethical failure due to the combination of deceptive research practices, harmful portrayal of subject, blatant disregard for the anonymity and potential reactions, and a fundamental misunderstanding of the context and nature of the information she gathered. The betrayal and spied on feeling expressed by community underscores the profound negative impact of her approach. Next, author John Martin talks about denial. He argues that ethical train wrecks often stem not from malicious intent but from a form of self deception or denial that prevents researcher from confronting the true implications of their actions on their subject. Martin would explain that researchers, being human, are prone to cognitive biases and motivated reasoning. Confronting ethical failings is uncomfortable. It challenges one's self image as a good ethnographer or a rigorous scientist. Denial serves as a psychological defense mechanism to avoid this comfort. The next topic in the chapter talks about baggage, and this section addresses the crucial idea that researchers do not enter the field as a blank slates. Instead, they carry with them a considerable amount of personal, social, and academic baggage that profoundly influences the research process and critically their ethical conduct. So, we already have a certain set of understanding of society, a certain, we are kind of in favor of certain ideology, against certain, and we have a certain understanding or a certain way in which we consider ourselves more superior to the respondent that we are studying. So, if we are say from a upper class and studying the working class, we are already with a baggage of an understanding that they are either dirty or they are precarious, and therefore, if we allow this baggage to affect our research, then it becomes a challenge to ethical principles. Researchers are individuals with their own unique histories, upbringing, cultural background, and personal belief. These inevitably shape how they perceive, interpret, and react to what they observe in the field. So, these baggage needs to be kind of taken care of. We as researcher need to be very cautious that these baggage does not impact our research. The next section grapples with the ethical dilemma that arises when researchers use data found in public domain such as social media posts, public forums, online comments, newspaper archives, government records, or even conversation in public spaces. And now with the say media, social media, blogging, post, podcast, a lot of data is available on the public domain. So, these public data are kind of easily accessible, and it becomes problematic when we are interpreting these public data. Martin challenges the common misconception that if data is out there for anyone to access, then it's free for researchers to use without consideration. So, the taken for granted assumption is that since this data is in the public domain and it is kind of not a personal or a private domain, the researcher can interpret or analyze the data without any ethical consideration. But this is not correct. It requires the same rigorous reflection, empathy, and discretion that applies to data gathered through direct interaction with human subjects. Because if we are interpreting the public data as social scientists, we need to follow the same principle of ethics, and we need to be cautious about whose data are we, from where have we got the data, and how is that data analysis going to impact the informant. So, when we talk about the public data, it is also important to understand the relation between realism and discretion. Martin aligned with a form of critical realism, as often discussed in social science philosophy, possessed that there is a discernible social reality that exists independently of the researcher's immediate perceptions or construction. This means that social phenomena, structures, and mechanisms have a real existence that can be investigated. A realist approach encourages researchers to look beyond mere appearance or individual subjective account to uncover underlying pattern, causal mechanism, and social structure. So, we need the symmetry, that is, we need to kind of refer to the idea that ethical quality of research is inextricably linked to its scientific quality. The symmetry that bad ethic is bad research needs to be kept in mind while doing the research in social sciences. So, this idea that we cannot do quality scientific research without maintaining ethical principle, it's a rejection of any notion that ethical considerations are secondary to or separate from the pursuit of rigorous knowledge. Symmetry implies a recognition of shared humanity between the researcher and the researched, just as the researcher employs the full cognitive and emotional faculties, so too do the subject. Ethical research requires acknowledging the subject agency, feelings, and potential vulnerability. So, bad ethic is used to bad research. If a researcher engages in unethical practice, deceptions, exploitation, disrespect, betrayal, lack of informed consent, it is fundamentally compromising on the data gathered. So, the idea of symmetry also connects to the classical sociological idea of impartiality. Weber's sign a studio without anger or passion, and a form of intellectual reciprocity. If a researcher truly embraces principal symmetry, they will naturally act ethically because they understand it is essential for good science. So, to conclude, John Levy Martin's ethics chapter would reinforce his central argument. Ethical rigor is not an external constraint on good social science, but rather its indispensable foundation. Instead, he powerfully reiterates that bad ethics fundamentally makes bad research. Ethical research implies to be responsible and conscientious human being first and a researcher second. So, with this, we come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.